My part 2 of the Primal Ordeal quest will focus only on how to do the Primal Menace boss. This boss is interesting because I wouldn't call it a final boss, even though it is the end goal of the quest, but it is more of a daily challenge that doesn't give any loot. However, there is two reasons for doing it. The main one, that by defeating the boss, you get to increase the level of hazard for your character. As long as you defeat it on a new hazard every time, it will continue to go up, and higher hazards increases the difficulty of the monsters and the boss fight, but in turn you get more experience, loot, and higher chances of summoning Plunder Patriarchs. And additionally, when you get to hazard 6, you get the Reaper Mount as a reward, and then at 12 you get one random item from the new Best in Slot sets. But in order to be able to attempt Menace, you must have completed the previous missions and defeated Magma Bubble. Once you have that, then head into the monster graveyard and follow this path. The monsters on the way there will be doing physical, earth, death and fire to the EK, and for the shooters it's mainly fire and earth. It's a fairly common practice to just run to the boss, but I personally don't do that and I wouldn't advise to do it either. All it takes is a bit of bad luck with a root and then you will get trapped, and it only takes around 5 minutes if you clear the way in. Now moving on to the boss fight, the main damage to the knight will be physical, earth and death, and for shooters it's mainly energy and earth, but some fire and death as well. I recommend to gear up with as much energy protection you can from items, and then the amulet slot to be a Turgic amulet on the low hazards and beginning of the fight, and then switch to Sacred Tree amulets as the fight progresses, and to start holding Sacred Trees the entire fight in the high hazards. For a knight with 2 druids, the damage was very manageable most of the times, so I was using physical protection from the set and Prismatic Ring, with earth protection coming from a Ghoul Necklace, Falcon Sword, and eventually Terra Helmet as well. And on my armor I had a energy imbuement, but in terms of defensive imbuements I recommend Death or Earth. And on the last 2 hazards I was starting to hold Sacred Tree amulets when getting more than 4 monsters. Now leaving equipment aside, let's talk about the boss mechanics, which surprisingly is very simple. Your focus on this fight is to stop Fungosaurus from spawning, which can spawn through 2 ways. The first one is if one of the primal beasts survives for more than 20 seconds, after which they will transform into Fungosaurus, keeping the HP they had for less than a second and then healing to full, which if you are lucky you might get an attack off before they heal. And the second way they can spawn is through not stepping on the primal pods, for which you have about 6 seconds to do once they spawn, and the higher hazard level, the number of pods at a time gets higher, and so does the chances of them appearing. Now the reason that you want to avoid getting a Fungosaurus is that they have an AoE fear and also AoE roots. The fear makes you run away and the roots keeps you in place. Both of those make the fight much harder, since if the knight gets feared for example and runs away, then the primal beast on him will set loose or it just gets harder to damage them, and that in turn increases the chances of more Fungosaurus to spawn. My recommendation for how to deal with them once they spawn is that if it is not on the knight immediately, then it's better to leave the room. But if it is, then the EK must use a bomb on him to avoid running on the fear. But be aware that when a pod spawns, it removes the fields nearby, so the EK must pay attention and refresh the bomb, and then focus down on the fungo together with the paladin. The mages must continue to use their spells on other monsters to stop more from spawning, for which if you have already a few monsters alive when the fungus spawns, then it will be harder to deal with it, and it's better to leave the room. Keep in mind that this boss can be repeated daily and your hazards can be lower at any time, so failing this boss doesn't stop you from continuing to hunt in any of the spawns, nor does it stop you from trying again. And that is very important to be aware of, since knowing when to leave the room will save you from unnecessary deaths, so don't be afraid to call it off. That doesn't mean it's impossible to recover from the fungus. Like I said, if the knight gets it early and the room is under control, then it's doable. However, I don't recommend to ignore the fungus to focus on the boss unless it's already on black HP, because we learned the hard way that the Fungosaurus do not despawn once the boss dies. So if you let them stuck on you thinking that once the boss dies they will disappear, then this will happen. Now that you know why the importance of not spawning Fungosaurus, let's talk about how to reduce the chances of that happening. There is 3 ways of doing this boss that I have seen. The first one is for the knight to move towards the monsters before they spawn, since by being nearby when it spawns, the chances of it targeting the knight are much higher. And in case 2 of them spawn at the same time, then the paladin goes to the other one and then lures that to the EK. Just be aware that it takes 6 seconds from the first respawn teleport, and that is not necessary to be right next to it. As long as you are the closest to it is enough. For that is important the shooters also move away from where it is spawning, and at the same time to be spread across the room to call out where they are respawning. The second way is similar, but it involves all the 4 shooters moving together and avoiding the area of respawn, and the EK goes there instead. And shooters, while being on the move all the time, they do most of their damage with used GFPs. The third one is to have a mix of both, of having the knife move towards the respawn at the beginning of the fight or when there isn't many monsters, but once it has 3 or more, then to stay on the middle and have whoever gets the aggro from the monsters to bring it to him. This is how me and my team did it, so that's how I recommend to do it as well. But be aware that the hardest spell from the boss is an energy UE that doesn't hit in the middle, so being next to the boss is not necessarily the most dangerous place to be. However, when getting close to him, you will get hit by AoEs from the other monsters and possibly the waves of the boss. Regardless, the main priority is to get the monsters on the EK so that everyone can focus on one place all of their attacks. And doing it this way is how we succeeded doing it, on a team of 2 1Ks and 3 900s. Lastly, some extra tips. The main rune from the mages should be GFP. Paladin should be using diamond arrows since it's more important to do damage on the monsters than the boss, and the sorcerer should be trying to use his wave the most, since both fire and energy are strong against the monster and the boss. But for druids, the Terra wave doesn't damage the boss and ice hits him for half, so the druid waves must be safe for when there is more than 3 monsters on the night. Other than that, it's better to GFP from afar and SD in case the boss is alone or if there is just one monster on the night. Also, the knight should try to be aware of the time for each monster, and if one in particular took longer to get on him, then to target that monster over the boss. And same applies for the beginning of the fight. When the boss is alone with just one monster, shooters should SD the boss and the knight focuses on doing the most damage to the monster instead. On the high hazards like the 10th and 11th, it's worth to start using the drone potions like strike enhancements on everyone and fire amplification for the sorcerer or damage amplification on the EK. Also, save the UEs for killing a monster that hasn't taken enough damage rather than just using it on cooldown or when there is too many monsters. For this, it's better for the EK to call out when the UE is needed, and in case of emergencies have some Kool-Aid potions to refresh the cooldown and double UE if needed. And the last tip for also the 10 and 11 hazard is to have a 6th person join the party with hazard level 1 and tag along for clearing the ways to the boss. This will make the way in a lot safer. And that's all I got for this one. I will also post all the files from 1 to 11 for those that are curious of one level in particular, so consider subscribing if you haven't already. Thank you for watching, and a special thanks to the supporters of the channel, Tuna Hero, Elber, and Thor the Slasher.